solve all these problems in the next 90 minutes. Well, we got the panel to help us do it, which will be great. I'm going to introduce the panel briefly. We're going to get right into this so we can make most efficient use of the time. My goal is to spend around an hour with the panel, actually maybe an hour 15, and leave a good 15 or 20 minutes for questions from the audience. So as you have questions as we're going through this, please jot them down, and we'll be able to share the microphone with you to get those questions answered. Going from left to right, our first panelist is Don Cunningham. He's President and CEO of Lehigh Valley Economic Development Corporation. He has a 22-year career in the Lehigh Valley's public and private sectors, working on some of the most respected, or for some of the most respected companies, institutions, and governments. He's been mayor of Bethlehem. He's been the Lehigh County executive. He's worked at a cabinet position on the state level before heading off to LVEDC. Everyone, Don Cunningham. To his left is Alicia Miller Karner. She is the director of the Department of Community and Economic Development for the City of Bethlehem. She was named to that post in January of 2014. And in this capacity, she manages the Bethlehem Revitalization and Improvement Authority and the Bethlehem Economic Development Corporation. She also oversees a broad range of programs that impact the quality of life in the city. Prior to working in community and economic development, she served as the District Chief of Staff for State Senator Lisa Boscola and worked in that Bethlehem office for 10 years. That's Alicia Miller Karner. To Alicia's left is Fred Rettig, who is Special Assistant for Act 47 for the PA Department of Community and Economic Development. He has extensive experience in local government policy and operational issues. He's a frequent speaker on local government issues. He has led Act 47 recovery efforts in Pittsburgh, Scranton, Johnstown, Reading, Harrisburg, and other fiscally challenged municipalities. He's a strong proponent of intergovernmental approaches to service delivery and led the department initiative to consolidate earned income tax collection. That's Fred Rettig. Next is the Reverend Gregory Edwards, Senior Pastor of Resurrected Life Community Church. He serves as the founding and senior pastor of the church in Allentown and as the Chief Executive Officer of the Resurrected Community Development Corporation. He's a native of the state of New Jersey and a graduate of Geneva College, the University of Delaware Graduate School in Urban Affairs and Public Policy, and Drew University. The Reverend Edwards. And finally, Zac Jaindl, who's COO of Jaindl Properties. He founded Jaindl Enterprises and his family of companies in 2011 with his father, Mark Jaindl. Jaindl Properties is one of the companies in the Jaindl Enterprises portfolio, is focused solely on the promotion of smart urban growth within the city of Allentown through the redevelopment of the city's historical buildings and sites. Primarily, that's the waterfront development that you probably read about along the Lehigh. So that's Zac Jaindl. I'm going to turn this on. Can you hear me okay with this microphone? So I need to pass this one up to the group here. Make sure that's on.
Hello. All right.
So if you can pass that down to Don, I'm going to have some questions for he and Alicia first. Let's talk economic development first. Don, how do you think we reconcile smart growth principles like a focus on the cities, infill development, efficient land use, and open space preservation with the need to develop jobs for a good bulk of these 150 or 145,000 people moving in without growing too much? How do we do that? What's the solution?
I have 2 minutes to give you that, right?
I'll give you 2.5.
Well, I think in the Lehigh Valley, honestly, we've done it very, very well. I mean, I think the Lehigh Valley is a great template for how to do balanced growth. I mean, probably a good decade ago, collectively, we set out to focus on our urban cores. You dial back 10, 15 years and you look at where Easton was then, and Bethlehem was then, and Allentown, it's like night and day to where they are now. So, that didn't happen by accident. I mean, I think there was a real good regional focus. Counties putting money in for infrastructure, private developers focusing on cities, doing good incentive programs in the urban core, land-based incentives like NIZs and CRIZs and TIFs and KOZs, which it seems like the movement now in economic development incentives is more about the location. In the old days it was more about grants and particular jobs and mobility around where incentives went. We've done a good job of incentivizing. And I think the Planning Commission and the local governments have done a nice job about carving out a development corridor around 22 and saying this is the growth area. This is where, you know, whether we like it or not, we're the 68th largest metropolitan area in the United States. We are 80 miles from New York and 60 miles from Philadelphia. We're 60 miles from the Port of New York. And those access to market issues are going to continue to make the Lehigh Valley an attractive place for companies to be. I think it's also going to continue to make the Lehigh Valley an attractive place for people to be and workers to be. So our economic development strategy, I think, over the last decade or two really has been working hard on brownfields, working hard on the urban core, but realizing you need to produce jobs for people of every socioeconomic level. And you know, you've all seen, and I know this morning you were discussing the Planning Commission projections about population growth, and the best way to keep the community strong is for all those folks to have a job and to be able to sustain themselves. So you're going to need to create jobs at every level, and we're going to need all, quite frankly, almost all, maybe not all 62 of our municipalities, but a good number of our municipalities across the valley to be involved in economic development for that to happen.
I'm curious, in terms of finding manufacturing space or additional distribution space in the next 20 years, I imagine we are going to see development west and north along the 33 corridor too, which isn't along, you know, maybe that core 22 area. What's there to prevent that from getting out of hand, maybe like it might have done in the 80s and 90s? And what can we put in place?
You know, I mean, that's a really good question. It's one we wrestle with. I mean, the thing I always say to audiences like this, when you talk about land use and development, we have to realize that every the state that we're in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, whether we like it or not, every municipality is 100% sovereign around zoning and planning. So each municipality, whether it's a 1 square mile borough or a 20 square mile township, will determine for itself its land use, whether they will zone industrial, commercial, whether they will do farmland preservation, which makes regional planning in a commonwealth. And we can blame William Penn for this, because this goes back to William Penn and the idea that the smallest municipality, the smallest village, if you will, will control its own governance, which is great. But then when you look at states like Maryland and Virginia, and you go to the Carolinas and Kentucky, where they have metro government with teeth, you know, where they can really do a county-wide plan and the counties control zoning and development.
Is that one of the answers here?
That's, well, yeah, I mean...
And is it possible?
I always say to folks that if you really want to make tremendous change in this, it has to come from Harrisburg, right? I mean, and Alan Jennings is here. Several years ago, he worked on the statewide planning commission, and they put forward some excellent recommendations to changes around the statewide planning code, which were all read and rejected. You know, so yeah, so you know, but this issue of how will we grow as a region and how far north or south will development be pushed outside of the 2278 corridor is one that, in the end of the day, the Planning Commission, in concert with or in force of the local governments, will determine. I always say in economic development, we can only attract companies to parcels that are available for development. If the community decides, hey, this is all going to be farmland pres, or we're not going to do it, it's ag, then it's off the chart, it's off the book for it.
And Alicia, and the same idea from the city of Bethlehem standpoint, since you are kind of in that urban core, are there things that could be done from an incentive standpoint to have some of that redevelopment happen within the urban areas as opposed to the outlying areas in a fair way?
Well, I think if you look at the city of Bethlehem over the last 20 years, we've taken advantage of pretty much every program offered through the state or federal government. And we really have a good case study of all of the incentive programs, whether they be place-based or grants that have been offered from the Commonwealth or tax credits from the federal government. So whether it's a TIF, we had one of the first TIFs that were created outside of the city of Philadelphia. We have used that TIF very wisely. We're approaching the end of it, but we have had a long tradition of LERTA. LERTA is a program in which you are incentivized to make improvements to your property, and you're given a property tax break on those improvements. And so we've done a really good job in Bethlehem, I believe, historically, of implementing the tools that have been provided to us to incentivize development.
Should incentives be offered to greenland development, such as what happened on the Stabler property, which is kind of outside of the urban areas?
Well, all I can say is when it comes to the city of Bethlehem, we're certainly going to focus internally and worry about what's happening in our backyard before we get too wound up over what's happening in the communities around us. It's the philosophy of the city that it's a comprehensive approach. We need to look at not just incentives for economic development projects, but also housing stock is particularly important. And I don't mean to jump too far ahead on our topics of conversation, but it's also about making sure that we have a variety of housing and we have the ability to put people in the houses that it's not always about offering jobs to those who are just here, but giving a variety of housing to those people that want to be here. And so community is made up by those active participants within it. And so it is a focus of ours to make sure that we're not just about job creation. It is the comprehensive approach that's necessary to make a healthy community.
Okay. Good.
If I can pick up on a couple of Don's comments, he certainly is on point when he talks about the local government's ability to control land use, control zoning. With that said, however, I think there are some things that can be done. As we look back, I guess about 14 years ago, there were some amendments to the municipalities planning code that made intergovernmental approaches to land use, to planning, more achievable, and we've tried to incent cooperative approaches to the development of comprehensive plans on an intermunicipal basis as opposed to a singular basis. And we've had some reasonable success with that across the state. I think there have been somewhere in the range of about 600 or so intermunicipal comprehensive plans that have been developed. Where the rubber really meets the road is implementing those plans, however, and there's been more of a struggle to try to address the implementing ordinances of subdivision, land development, and zoning. And I think that's an area that needs continued focus as those communities that have come together to undertake joint approaches to comprehensive plans need to take that next step and make sure that they're implementing the recommendations on a intermunicipal type basis.
And Fred, what do you think the barrier is there? They want to get together to have a plan, and the plan's in place, and then there's struggle, there's conflict. What's the holdup?
Nobody wants to give up local control.
It's control, right?
Yeah.
It's local control, and it's trying to think out of the box, think differently than we've done for the last 200 years, and breaking down some of those barriers are very difficult. I have found you try to incent cooperation, and you dangle some carrots, some financial carrots out there to try to encourage it. But you have to really have strong, effective leadership, in my opinion. You need effective leadership in the community that is willing to, embrace those types of ideas and set aside the past, but rather look at the future.
Great, thank you. I know an important part of economic development is an educated workforce. And I'd be curious, from Reverend Edwards' standpoint, what changes do you see need to be made in the educational systems, both primary, secondary, and maybe beyond in the Lehigh Valley, to make sure everyone can take advantage of an improving workforce and economy here?
Sure. Testing. Okay. It's probably dangerous to get a Baptist preacher 2 minutes to answer a question like that. And I'm used to, by the way, folk talking back to me, so you can talk back to me and make me feel at home a little bit. We have a problem. We have a definitive problem with our school districts, specifically in Allentown, Bethlehem, Easton. And when we talk about 145,000 more folk coming to the Lehigh Valley, that is definitely going to change the infrastructure, but moreover, it's going to change the way that we educate our workforce, but moreover, the way we educate our children. And it's an absolute travesty that the Allentown School District in particular has a 60% graduation rate, has single-digit proficiency scores on PSSA tests for specific pockets of population, and that is underwritten by taxpayer dollars, right? And so that becomes, if you will, the elephant in the room. We can do all the development we want, but if we don't educate our children, I'm not sure that this conversation is going to go much further than simply waxing philosophically, right? So we're going to have to think about how do we re-engage our schools, but moreover, how does the school re-engage its community? And we've heard a lot about economic development, and I'm okay with development, but to all these conversations, there is a human side, right? A city is like an ecological system. It's like a human body. And if you start carving out certain sectors of it and not thinking about the impact on the other aspects of the body, you're going to find yourself in trouble. And part of what we have in our communities is, a lot of myths, specifically about the city. So let me go there real quick. There's a myth, right, in some of the communities we drive by, that all of a sudden, some of these communities we drive by, the black folk just got mad and tore up the community. The Latino folk just got mad and tore up the community. They just got mad. We don't think about the years of ongoing public policy that has helped to create those conditions and how they've been sanctioned. We don't think about urban renewal and that Urban Renewal Act in 1949. We don't think about the deindustrialization of our cities, the disinvestment that has happened, that has been really enforced by protocol plan shrinkage. And then basically urban flight, right? Foreclosures, gentrification, Hope 6, right? And what begins to happen is, what we're not aware of, specifically in our urban environments, is there's a loss, when all this stuff happens, there's a loss of money, because it takes money to move. It takes money to move folk from one side of the street to the other side of the street. So there's a loss of money. There's a loss of social organization, right? There is also, there's some great work being done out of Columbia by a public health psychiatrist by the name of Mindy Fulleylove. And I would really invite you to read a lot of her work, but part of what she says is that there's deep psychological trauma in many of our communities. And you can't escape that. It's coming to a zip code near you, right? So when we talk about economic development, which predominantly sees wealth, the creation of wealth, as a way to solve problems, I would flip that and say that community economic development and placing people at the heart of the equation and listening to those stories becomes critical to moving the ball as it relates to school, as it relates to our neighborhoods.
Now, Reverend Edwards, I'd be interested in Zac's perspective on this. Here's a gentleman, you mentioned that this is an issue throughout the Lehigh Valley, but possibly more profound in our city areas like Allentown. Here's a person who is investing hundreds of millions of dollars in the city of Allentown. When you hear something like that, what does that make you think about your investment and the likelihood of it succeeding and the impact that it could have?
Of course, and this work.
Yeah,
okay,
takes a little time to get going.
No problem. And in fact, Reverend, we could agree more. A lot of what we talk about at the waterfront, especially with our counterparts over at City Center in Allentown as well. I will speak primarily on the basis of Allentown today, primarily because that's what I know, and I've talked to a lot of people throughout the city. A lot of people are actually interested in helping the school districts, etc. The one thing, and I know it's not the solution to everything, is you're right, it's a joint effort, it's a human solution here that we need. It's a combination of generating the money we need to help our school districts and helping the teachers and improving the facilities we need to educate our children and help facilitate ongoing education throughout their lives. The one example we have come to actually use in a lot of these questions, the waterfront specifically. Again, I'm speaking because I know it, not because it's fact or just research that I read online. But right now, the waterfront is on the former site of Lehigh Structural Steel along the western banks of the Lehigh River. That's 26 acres within the city of Allentown. That site was generating $120,000 a year in real estate taxes. At the full completion of the waterfront, we'll be generating over $4 million a year in real estate taxes. It's a massive influx of tax money into the city. Again, that's tax money not seized by the NIC, that goes directly into the appropriate funds. And it's a first step toward helping our children, our infrastructure, our public safety. It's doing what we can initially, and then basically it's following up with a number of, as Reverend Edwards said, a number of human solutions, stepping up and making sure that we have the community leaders we need in order to facilitate this ongoing educational push to help our children in our school districts, not only in Allentown, but other ongoing redeveloping cities such as Bethlehem and Easton.
Reverend Edwards, you want to say something?
So, testing.
Testing.
Yep.
I'm excited about the creation of an increased tax base for, unfortunately, we live in a commonwealth that has an antiquated funding system for public education. I think we all get that. And so it would be, I think, tremendous to see developers who have that capital hold school districts accountable for different outcomes and metrics and say, we will not give you, we will escrow, right? We will not give you. Seems pretty avant-garde, but you know the definition of insanity, right? So you keep on giving a failing district more money. I'm not sure if that's going to work, right? Until there is I think until there is a high-level conversation, a mid-level conversation, a low-level conversation, until the community is invited to the table to be active participants as it relates to the school, as it relates to economic development. I mean, I'm happy that Allentown's changing. I'm happy. But I know, unfortunately, you know, a city that's going to be good for some is not going to be great for all. And we can use metaphors about all boats rising, and we can wax philosophically, but until we get to the alleyways of Allentown, where the real stuff goes down, until we are willing to do some investment in the least engaged, right? I'm not sure if we're going to really create a community. You know, a community is a human network of lives that begin to find meaning because they're engaging with each other. And so we think of economic development kind of like a greenhouse, right? And so we're able to go downtown, carve out a part. It's going to impact other parts. A city really is like, not a greenhouse, it's really like a rainforest. If you change one element of the rainforest, it begins to affect and impact every other element within it. So I think that's kind of the thinking that we have to be able to engage around economic development, around community. And part of the difficulty of this conversation is, as soon as we start talking about community, it gets real messy, right? Because you can't control community. But really, and community, folk that are poor ain't stupid. Okay? Seen that playbook before. So part of what happens when we talk about how to engage in the community, the expertise shifts in the room. And we said, when we use words like community and relationship, that seems real soft, specifically the capitalist. But the fact of the matter is, you need everybody's voice at the table. And part of what happens over and over and over again, right, is we don't make up the menu, but we get invited to the table, and then somebody asks me, how do you like the meal? Right? So I'm hoping, in terms of ideas, the actions, we can talk about how do we engage. I think Kevin Green is doing a workshop. How do we engage the community? And how do we really engage the community and understand that all ground must be level and equal?
I'm curious from Don and Alicia's standpoint, when you're reaching out to companies that want to come to this area or redevelop in the area, is this something that they want to hear? Or they want to come in, they want it clean, no mess, just come in, put my building up and start hiring? To what extent do they want to be engaged with discussions like that? And to what extent do they feel forced to be in discussions like that? You guys are going to fight over the microphone, right?
Well, there's not a business that we talk to, whether they're new and looking at the Lehigh Valley as a place to potentially relocate to, or a company that's here. And we always have to remember that in this 21st century world of technology, that just because a company's here today doesn't mean that they're going to be here tomorrow. As the world becomes more interconnected, as technology advances everything, companies can operate from wherever they wish to. So I always like to inject into the discussion, because everybody talks about new companies coming in. The reality is 70% of our growth is organic. It comes from companies that are here. So a lot of our work is with companies to keep them here, keep them growing here, and the often forgotten part about piece of economic development is to start here. So entrepreneurship, startup, working at the universities, if we can gestate and give birth to companies, whatever of those three sectors, of the three legs of the stool, the first thing they talk about is people, workers, right? Now you got to remember, this is a capitalist world. The companies are in it for one reason, to make money. They hire workers not as a social program. They hire workers because they need to get a job done, right? That's you have a company, you hire people not to be a good charitable citizen because you got a job to do and you got to get it done. So what do you want? You want people with the right skill to get that done. So every company we talk to is talking about workforce, people, what skills do you have? Starting where you started this discussion was around education. And it's education at every level, from pre-K through the public schools, through the tech schools, through the community colleges, right up to the PhDs we're putting out at Lehigh. So it's always about who do you have? And that's become more of the, I've said to folks we deal with, the regions that are going to be successful in economic growth and stability for the next decades are the regions that figure out the workforce and training equation. You will get the type of companies that you have the workforce for. If you have an undereducated and unskilled workforce, you will get a lot of companies where people are putting little parts together all day long, repetitive motion. If you're cranking out PhDs in biochemistry, you're going to get some tech companies. One of the big misnomers of economic development is when people say, we want this kind of company, not that kind of company. You have to look at your existing landscape of the type of workforce that you have. That's the type of companies you will get.
I think what we see is, we see companies of all sizes in the city of Allentown, and they're made up of people, and just like there are, all kinds of people that have interests in a variety of things. I mean, this room is not filled with all the residents of the city of Allentown because not everybody's interested in this topic, and so we see some companies and some businesses that are very interested and they're very engaged and they very much are focused on either education or community development or some facet of the issues that we're talking about here today. But not all companies and not all businesses do. Some open their shops at 10 o'clock in the morning if they want to, and close them at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It really is dependent. What we try to do as a city is we look to, whether it's a business or the evil developers, incentivize them to partner with us on initiatives that we think are important. And so we as government have a limited role in that, but we try to prioritize that. We try to push them in directions that we think are in the best interest of whatever the issue is that we're trying to tackle.
And Fred, is there anything from your experience with other cities where you've seen solutions with the community and education and economic development coming together?
Well, I think you have to build on the assets that the community has. Those assets are people assets to a great extent. They can be educational assets, they can be medical assets. You have to look at those assets and then build a new economy around those assets. And I'll give you the example of Pittsburgh. As we know, historically, Pittsburgh was a steel town, Pittsburgh Steelers, and everything that went with the steel industry. Pittsburgh has made, I think, a remarkable transition from that heavy industry economy to an economy today built on what I term the eds and meds. The educational facilities that they have, the medical facilities that they have. They've been very successful in recruiting entities like Google and other tech enterprises because they have the people coming out of places like Carnegie Mellon and University of Pittsburgh that can feed that type of technology-driven economy. Likewise with the medical industry, there is a lot of R&D activity that is taking place because they've got the resources, the people resources to feed that type of an economy. But any community needs to look at what assets they have currently, and people are number one in terms of those assets.
Anything else anyone else wants to add at this point? Done?
I would just say, amen.
Shortest comment all day.
I think Fred's comment is right on. I would only say that the Lehigh Valley is only a tick maybe behind Allegheny County and Pittsburgh. Very much the same. Heavy industrial economy based on steel, auto manufacturing. The transition of this economy, the types of jobs and the types of companies that have here have evolved tremendously. This is an American success story. You look at that 1,800 acres right here in Bethlehem that was steel making up until 1998 4.5 miles along the river only 15, 16 years ago. Today, about 85% of that land is reused in the city. There are technological firms down there. There are investment firms down there. There's the arts. There's the casino, which employs 1,000 people from the neighborhood. And there's industrial commercial centers loaded with manufacturing and distribution anchored by an intermodal terminal. In 15, 16 years, to take 22% of a city and have it be turned around and productively reused with mixed use, I love Pittsburgh, but I'm a Lehigh Valleyan and I'm a Bethlehemite. I put the Bethlehem story right there with the Allegheny County and the Pittsburgh story.
You know, you mentioned the intermodal terminal and access to transportation. For redevelopment to happen in the inner part of the Lehigh Valley, is there infrastructure there for it to happen, or do we need to build out and restore some of that infrastructure? Are we looking for something that is inachievable?
No, I mean, infrastructure is one of the biggest challenges always, and particularly if you're in a growth mode, whether it's roads and bridges, interchanges, freight rail, how you're getting people and products to move around. You look at the key of redeveloping the Bethlehem Steel site were infrastructure decisions. Northampton County building what the leaders at that time were criticized and vilified for building a road to nowhere, they called it. I think there was a gentleman named Ron Angle up in the Slate Belt that every day lambasted everybody on the Northampton County Council for building a road to nowhere. Well, that road is now to somewhere. That road has developed 1,000 acres of manufacturing and industrial reuse. Infrastructure is always key. When we started redevelopment of the steel site, first thing we did was lay down new roads, streetscapes, water, and sewer. Zac, I'm sure, is going through this. He and his father and Andy and Ryan are doing a great job on 26 acres. Imagine doing that on 1,800 acres. That's a lot of roads, that's a lot of infrastructure.
Alicia, is that what you're seeing too, being in the
I was
city?
going to say it's not bust, it's happening today. I mean, just as to piggyback on what Don said, if we had the opportunity that was created by the demise of Bethlehem Steel was huge, and so I think we're seeing that in Allentown today. Everything has a flip side, so we can't focus on what the losses are or what the problem, we don't want to get mired exactly what the summit is today. We want to look at tomorrow, and so how do we capitalize on what those opportunities are? So I think we're successfully doing that in Bethlehem, and that's, as Don said, it cannot be understated the decision made in 2001 to float a $100 million bond issuance to invest in large part in economic development for the county. And so it isn't just Bethlehem. I mean, there were other areas. It was the 4 points approach to the county, and so that was huge. I mean, we may be paying down that debt service still today, but the investment that's been, that has resulted in the job creation numbers are something that I think all communities should take a look at doing. And it's a large thing it's a huge undertaking. It was a huge political battle, as we can all recall, but the payoff in the long run is tremendous.
But people lost elections over it.
I guess in politics and being parochial, and so sometimes we do need to make those decisions that are in our best interest. That aren't just the politically correct decision to be made.
Well, we've been talking about economic development, really focusing on jobs and businesses, but if we bring 145,000 people to the Lehigh Valley, they need to live somewhere. So I'm going to hand it over to Zac. He's certainly going to say that he has the solution with where people are going to live, but let's, in the previous panel, the gentleman from K Builders was saying, it's a market situation. People are going to live based on what the market conditions are and where it's palatable from a tax standpoint, from a land standpoint. How do we make it more palatable to have people live where we have existing infrastructure as opposed to creating more sprawl?
Of course. One thing that we're actually seeing a lot of today is nationwide actually is a trend of both millennials and empty nester baby boomers moving toward the apartment scene, renting rather than owning homes. Primarily because if you're an empty nester, why bother having a 4-bedroom house with a 2-car garage, 2 cars with maintenance on, primarily in the suburbs, obviously. So they're actually making a move in major metropolitan areas like Philadelphia and New York toward the urban centers where they already have the existing infrastructure where they could walk to the local grocery store, recreational opportunities, experience culture of their region just simply by walking out the front door. Millennials, on the other hand, are seeking the same opportunities but for different reasons. They want to be able to walk to work every day and frankly be able to go out, go to a restaurant. For instance, the PP&L agreement is perfect. I mean, I have people contacting me from Lehigh who are asking me what's going on in Allentown because they see this major redevelopment, they see all these things happening, and they want to live in a small metropolitan area without having to pay the expenses of Philadelphia or New York City. So what you see going on right now in Allentown is the development of a number of different apartment complexes. Range from market rate to the higher end. City Center right now is actually putting up one building which is it's fantastic. It's a beautiful building. But the last time I talked to them, they were 70% preserved. And the building's not even open yet. It's a matter of people are literally beating down doors right now to get into the apartment rental. And what you see going right now, I mean, happening throughout the city is a major redevelopment that allows people to experience all these amenities without having to move out to the suburbs. And frankly, if you're looking at Allentown itself, I know many neighborhoods throughout the city, and Reverend Edwards actually said it is expensive even to move people across the street. But you do have neighborhoods with greater than 10% vacancy rates right now throughout the city of Allentown with homes that are beautiful, 200 years old, with beautiful bones, and frankly, they require little TLC, but in the end of the day, they are there. We have homes throughout Allentown. It's a matter of utilizing the existing infrastructure and bringing people downtown to experience what we already have, build up rather than out, so that we can still utilize the suburban living complexes, like many of the housing developments, but really still experience Allentown for what it is, or frankly Bethlehem or Easton for that point.
Does it require tax incentives like the NIS, or is it just going to end up being a market situation where there's a people desiring to live downtown or in a more compact area?
Of course. Frankly, if you look at it, and I've always referred to the NIS, and I know there's a lot of controversy and debate over it, but I've always looked at the NIS as a short-term investment for long-term benefit. You see this NIS sparking development throughout the city, and frankly, hopefully what we'll see is a number of other developments, both low-income, mid-income, and high-income, popping up that allows a number of different living incentives for people all over the city, whether it's the NIS, inside the NIS, or outside the NIS. So whether it's the apartment complexes popping up to make sure that local neighborhoods have the tax revenue to improve the infrastructure, and hopefully various programs go into effect after the city government is able to assess the various neighborhoods that are currently vacant, and we're able to improve these neighborhoods to still foster a sense of culture that's always existed in Allentown. So hopefully, these are one of the many effects, and there's a lot of moving parts in it. To answer your question, I don't think that you need the tax incentive for every single living opportunity that pops up, but I think even incentives like J.B. Riley and City Center are offering right now, the facade program, where they're actually offering incentives to fix up the facade of your building in order to attract other businesses downtown and help increase the amount of amenities, the amount of shops, the amount of retail that bring people downtown, get feet on the street. And again, that moves towards a whole other direction, which is a very widespread answer, but it's an overall bettering of the urban infrastructure that we have existing right now, rather than building out and keep laying down, frankly, sprawl.
I think Reverend Edwards wanted to say something, and then we'll go to Alicia.
I appreciate Zach's comments. I think it gets back, for me at least, and it may sound like it's a one-pony show, but it gets back to education, right? Because we can create, through economic development, a work here environment, but it would almost be self-sacrifice for you to move to Allentown and place your child in some of the school buildings that we have in the Allentown School District. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. And until something is done strategically with that, until there's a serious conversation, right? So between the administration and the school board and residents, until we engage the conversation like that, I think it's going to be still a gamble. It's going to be still, because ultimately it's about bodies, it's about folk being educated, it's about an educated workforce, and unless something happens with the largest purveyor of taxpayer dollars, I mean, right, the Allentown School District in particular has got a budget that's 3 times the size of the city without the NIS, right? So it's got a huge budget, and until we address that, I think that we have a weekend warrior community where folk will come in for the hockey game, come in for the beer, but they're not going to live there until we do something with what's happening in urban education. So, I know that we're talking about these topics in a linear fashion, but there's a lot of interplay between the two of them. Housing is the #1 way that we create a wealth in America. We all know that. You own your home, you have equity. You have equity, you can go places, it can open doors for you. You live in the zip code you live in on the basis of the education you received. And most of the jobs that are being created, what it is, folks aren't going to be able to put themselves into the elite private schools in the Lehigh Valley, like the Swains, like the Moravians. Kids would go to the Allentown School District, the Bethel School District, the Easton School District. So I think the conversation between the developers and the district and the community would be a great triad of how that works. I mean, that to me sounds right.
Let me go to Zach quickly, and then to Alicia. We'll call it a little audible here. Let's get your feedback on that as a developer.
Yeah, of course, and frankly, I couldn't agree more. We've actually taken part, my father actually serves on an action committee with a number of Allentown School District representatives, government representatives, etc. That is actually working for that just now, but you're 100% right. The menu can't be established, and then you invite to the table and ask what you think. It really requires to sit down on a number of levels, and frankly, we couldn't agree more as a company. And I think we're moving toward that direction. Even with one action committee that didn't exist a year ago, we're now meeting monthly to make sure that we do what we can, speaking with not only the Allentown School District representatives, but the city and the private developers, and understanding exactly what programs we can put in place to help facilitate these children's education. So we couldn't agree more.
Okay, Alicia?
A lot of times people think that municipal officials have ultimate control over everything that happens within a community, and we certainly, those of us in government, know that that isn't the case. And one of the things I learned a long time ago was that a willing property owner and a willing community is a winning combination. A lot of times you have a community that's willing and you have nobody that wants to invest, or you have a property owner that isn't incentivized. And I don't mean that from a programmatic perspective. I just mean that they don't need to. They don't need the money to, they're either wealthy or they don't need to do something with their property. We use the Champion Spark Plug building in Hellertown as a prime example. The woman just sits on that property and nothing happens with it. But one thing we do have control over in the city of Bethlehem is code enforcement. And so I can't stress enough the importance of a municipal entity emphasizing code enforcement within their community. We don't always have the capacity to go out to the 24,000 structures that we have within the city on a very regular basis, but to get in there to make sure that these homes, and we too often hear that there are homes that have people in them that have no keys, or that there's holes in the floor, or there's a problem, and they're renters, they're homeowners, they're the mixed bag of folks living in these units. But what we can do is we can enforce the codes that are on the books as best we can, so that we force our housing stock to come up to a level in which we don't just have weekend warriors of people who don't have kids, where maybe education isn't a factor, but that are willing to come in and they're willing to live within our community. When you have code enforcement, you have increased quality, you have a perception of increased safety in a community. I totally buy into the Alan Jennings argument of code enforcement versus law enforcement. If you don't address your code enforcement issue within your community, you're going to have law enforcement issues. So that's something that we are very much focused on. And so I think it's important to note that not every property is going to be about a new unit within your city. That's not what we're all about. But it's also about bringing that existing housing stock, those units, those parcels up to a level in which we all would want to live in.
If you can hand that to
I can just add.
Fred, and then, yeah, Fred, and then.
Just real briefly, but I want to pick up on Reverend Edwards' point. And an issue that we really struggle with, I struggle with, in working with a lot of our communities across the state that are distressed. And we can do a lot on the municipal side of things, addressing code enforcement, addressing operational issues. The real juggernaut, though, I find is with the educational system. And we have to tackle the educational element of the community if we're going to be able to ultimately restore that community to a long-term sustainability position. I find in some communities where a lot has been done on the economic development front and the housing front, that people will stay there, will live there until they have kids who reach school age, and then they migrate, they flee, and they won't stay. And in other communities, we don't even get to that level because the school district is a real impediment to people wanting to reside in the community. So I think we really need to, as we look at state policy, we look at an incoming administration that wants to put a strong emphasis on educational issues to really address that component of community revitalization.
If you can pass it down to Don, that'd be great.
And I'm going to really build on what the Reverend and Fred just said and kind of state the obvious, but it would be a shame in a group like this not to put this issue on the table. The biggest challenge for the Allentown schools is that it's just a city school district. If it were a regional school district like Bethlehem's, and yes, that was a local decision, and jumping off of what Fred said, what can the state do? You know, a lot of people assume that school districts across Pennsylvania were always organized the way they are. In the 60s, the state mandated consolidation of school systems. That's how we ended up with the 501 that we have today. Bethlehem at the time chose to consolidate and include what were then farming townships into the city school district, which included Hanover Township and Bethlehem Township. Allentown chose, at that time, they chose not to do that. Could you imagine if Parkland and Emmaus and Allentown were all one school district? A lot of these issues that the Reverend is rightfully talking about and the solutions that we're attempting to find would have solved themselves. Not all of them, but you would have had wealth and money in the schools. You would have had a diversity of socioeconomics and race within the public school system. And I don't know why that can't be put back on the table again. I realize politically it's pushing a boulder up the hill, but it was done at one time in Pennsylvania. And to me, that is probably the simplest financial solution to the problem of urban schools, but it never gets mentioned.
Is it a possibility? Could it happen in 10 years, 20 years, 4 years? Governor Rendell brought it up 8 years ago, 6 years ago as a possibility and caused a lot of discussion.
Possible, and I always think that in crisis there's opportunity. And you look at what's happening in Harrisburg right now, we have a $2 billion shortfall in the state budget. I think there's a desire from both parties to do more to support public education. Governor Corbett found out how attractive it is and how ultimately successful it is to cut back on state support of education, right? He will be a private citizen on January 20th. So I think from both parties' perspective, there's an interest in doing something. There's a budget shortfall. Now would be the time to put some things on the table that can help to solve financial issues around schools, and consolidation of school districts, to me, would be one of those things. It ought to be put on the table.
You think the time's right for that?
I think the time's right. Your first question was, can it happen? I mean, I'm basically a realist. It's going to take some time, but I think it should be put on the table.
Anyone else want to talk about that? It's a nice segue to governmental cooperation. I like that. Good.
I think the last time we were at the table, somebody mentioned regionalization of the school district, and I think that's a good thing. I think what it does, though, is it invites a whole lot of folks to the table that haven't been at the table. And I'm not simply talking about folk of different races, I'm talking about folk of different zip codes, right? So I support that. I support what Donna just said, and the interesting thing is how do you implement that? And I think in the Lehigh Valley, we need to have a serious conversation about diversity. We need to have a serious conversation about diversity, and sometimes agree to disagree. But the fact of the matter is, we don't live in our father's Allentown anymore. The landscape is becoming increasingly brown and black and beige. And the socioeconomic groups and racial groups are mixing like ever before. And until we can be serious and have an intelligent, academically informed conversation in a room such like this, that's going to be difficult to regionalize the school district. Can you imagine that?
Yeah.
Can you imagine Allentown School District with 18,000 students, 90% of them black and brown going to Parkland? And I'm not trying to make an indictment against Parkland. But we know 1954, we integrated our children, many of them, into burning buildings. And it really wasn't integration, it was assimilation. Because nothing changed except the color of the student body. So if we're going to regionalize, we have to have some serious conversation. We need to, as my grandfather would say, we need to put on our big boy pants, right? And really have some heart-to-hearts and not demonize each other, not point fingers, but understand that the Lehigh Valley is very diverse. And just because something is diverse, it means it's different. Just because it's different doesn't mean it's dysfunctional. It's different. And if we can't live in difference, we're going to be living in the valley, cognitive dissonance. And we will be staying away from that which is the other folk, whoever the other is. Whether the other is the community looking at the developers or the developers looking at the community. We've got to be able to build a bridge across difference through some real conversations. And hopefully some of that can start in this room, I hope.
Great. Fred, a question for you. Beyond the school districts, in your opinion, what are the biggest opportunities for either functional consolidation or consolidation of some of our governmental entities?
Well, there are two approaches to consolidation. One is, as you indicate, functional, and the other is structural. Structural consolidation is the joining together through either merger or consolidation of two or more municipal governments. The Constitution really lays out the parameters for that, and basically it requires the majority vote of the electorate of all impacted municipalities. That is a heavy lift. That is a very heavy lift. We have had minimal success in seeing municipal mergers occur. We were talking before the session started, your neighboring county of Berks has had a little bit of success in that regard. They've had two successful mergers that have occurred, Wyomissing and Wyomissing Hills, and Muhlenberg Township, Temple Borough merged into Muhlenberg Township over about the last decade. Those two have occurred, and there's currently an effort in the Mount Penn area that is under consideration. There has not been any boundary change that has been successful here in the Lehigh Valley, however. And you're not going to see, in contrast to what happened back in the 1960s with school consolidation, you're not going to see a state top-down approach to forcing that unless you see the Constitution change. On the other hand, you have functional consolidation, which is service consolidation. You know the numbers here in the Lehigh Valley of the number of municipalities, of authorities, of other entities. You know, statewide, those numbers are really amazing. And whenever I speak, had the opportunity to speak at several national conferences, and I lay out the numbers, and people just start shaking their head. 2,600 municipal governments below the county level, 3,000 pension funds, over 1,000 municipal police departments. The numbers are staggering. So in terms of potential, there is tremendous potential for functional consolidation. Many of the programs that our department and other state agencies provide, and even at the federal level, try to incent intergovernmental cooperation and bring communities to the table. Ultimately, I think one of the biggest impediments, and Don mentioned it earlier, is the loss of that local control. You need to have effective leadership that is willing to really embrace the idea that services can, in many instances, not necessarily in all instances, but in many instances, be provided more efficiently if communities are working together. And it may result in upfront cost savings, or even more important, it results in cost avoidance moving forward. It also can result in an improved level of service. You're able, for instance, in a police consolidation initiative that would be undertaken, you're able to provide greater opportunities for promotional opportunities for the employees, for the police officers. You're able to focus more on some of the specialized services and provide those services at a higher level, if they're even provided at all right now. Some of the biggest impediments, though, besides the loss of that local control, there is an unwillingness to really look at a realistic approach to cost sharing. Look at what services are being provided to your community and recognize that you need to pay for those at a realistic cost moving forward, so that you have a formula in terms of that cost-sharing approach that is equitable to all parties and is one that can be accepted. We try to encourage intergovernmental cooperation to, in any number of forums, and we've had a lot of success around the state with regional policing, shared code enforcement, volunteer fire consolidation. Because of the declining numbers of volunteers, there's been a greater interest in communities looking at fire service and willingness to work together on fire consolidation. When you look at the cost of fire equipment, it doesn't make sense for every community to have a $1 million ladder truck sitting in their firehouse. Look at it on a cost-sharing type of basis. So there are ample opportunities when we look at service consolidation to provide more effective, more efficient services at a lower cost to the residents. And I think, as I look around the state, some parts of the state are more willing to think out of the box and to approach service consolidation from that standpoint. As we work down in the south central part of the state, York County in particular has been in the forefront of a lot of intergovernmental approaches. They have, I think the number is up to 8 regional police agencies throughout the county. They've done a lot in terms of fire protection. They're looking at some of the back office type operations, code enforcement.
And Fred, what made it work there? Why is it happening there and not here?
And that's what I want to really close with. I think it's attitudinal, and there has been a migration of population coming out of the Metro DC Baltimore area into York County that is more attuned to a countywide or regional approach to service delivery, and that attitudinal acceptance of services being provided on a intergovernmental approach has really resulted in much greater success than you find in certain other parts of the state.
Anyone else want to comment on? Yeah.
Well, I would just, I don't want to always feel like I'm the lone defender of the Lehigh Valley, but these are not new things to the Lehigh Valley either. Northampton County has 2 regional police departments. Hard in getting started, but based in, I don't remember all the municipalities, one up in the Slate Belt, Alicia can talk about, and in Lehigh County, and I see Percy Dougherty here as a commissioner of Lehigh County several years ago, we consolidated all the back office of the police departments into a regional communications center. I think both of the counties now have gone to regionalized booking at the facility. So there, in Lehigh County, we created a COG of all 25 municipalities. Northampton County, I see Diane Danaher here, the Community and Economic Development Director in Northampton County. They're working closely with their municipalities. We have some multi-municipal plans in both counties. So this is not new terrain for the Lehigh Valley, 62 municipalities or counties, although it's difficult work. And at the end of the day, it requires some level of giving up local control. But we've had, I would consider, some modest success in this area, but there's more that we can do.
Alicia, you want to add?
Yeah, I was going to say something similar. We do have those successes that Don had highlighted. We certainly do have a long way to go. I mean, Bethlehem, which sits in 2 counties, is frequently viewed as having the opportunity to use the resources of both counties, and coming to the city in January, I found that it's the opposite. I mean, we really have a little island here in the city of Bethlehem. We have our own health bureau, we have our own 911 system, we have our own ambulance service, we have our own fire department. We don't service others that are outside of our borders, and it is important for us to look there. And I think it starts in small steps. I know there was recently a partnership between Northampton County and the City of Allentown on a phone program. And so, it doesn't sound like a sexy issue, but if it's going to save money, if it's going to end some redundancy, we certainly should look at those opportunities. So we're seeing it.
I see Armel Arndt here from Lehigh County Authority. The consolidation of the Lehigh County Water Wastewater Authority with Allentown, which was probably one of the biggest consolidations you're going to find that actually helped to save the finances of Allentown City because of their legacy costs on the pension, combining with LCA for LCA to buy water from the city and to buy into wastewater was a huge success. Sometimes these successes go unnoticed somewhat, but I think this organization that's sponsoring this, Renew Lehigh Valley, was created in large part around ideas of regional consolidations of functionalities of services and regional planning, and I know Renew has worked real hard on some of these issues. As Alicia said, there's plenty more that we can do, but we have a nice foundation.
Great. Anyone else on that before we open it up for questions? No? Like I promised, I did want to save plenty of time. We do have another 20 minutes for questions, so everyone up here is fair game. I saw some people jotting some things down. What questions do we have? You're going to make me come all the way back there with my microphone. Can you get up and project?
Want me to come up there?
Come on up. Oh, it's you, Fritz. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing
You know, this has been a terrific discussion. And as I've been sitting here, I've drawn an analogy to what's happening in the Lehigh Valley. We started a fire. We've got maybe the Kindle burning, maybe we have some half-inch sticks, but we don't have logs on there. I lived in Detroit 25 years ago, or I should say I lived in the suburbs of Detroit. And I saw what happens when that fire is extinguished. And the suburban communities absolutely turned their backs on the city of Detroit. There were reasons for it, they went both ways, but it was just a disaster. It was a disaster to see happening. And living in the suburbs there kind of stunk. Okay, I always referred to it as a cultural wasteland. There was nothing in Detroit that would bring you down to Detroit to enjoy the things that you get out of an urban center, a vital one like Philadelphia or New York, or what Allentown, can be, and what we can see in Lehigh Valley. My question to the panel, though, is when I talk to people out in the suburbs about this, they look at me like I'm crazy. They don't understand that we're all in it together. And that if we make Allentown better, even though I live out in South Whitehall or Lower Macungie, my life is going to be substantially better. What's the message that's going to convince people of that?
It's really going to be an experience aspect of this whole renaissance. Really, we're in the infant stage of everything that's happening. Right now, you see buildings going up, steel's going up, and you see buildings being produced, and an arena opening up. And it's fantastic. It really is. But I have the same effect. I visit family out in the suburbs, and I talk to people about what's going on in Allentown. And being in the midst of it, I see everything going on, and I live it every day. But unfortunately, they don't. And I think it's going to be an ongoing process where once you start seeing apartments pop up, once you start seeing new jobs come downtown, new eating opportunities, everything, they're going to come downtown, they're going to experience it, and then they're finally going to buy into the Allentown of today rather than the Allentown of 10 or 15 years ago that they perceived as a lost cause, which is a terrible, terrible thing that's frankly ongoing in Lehigh Valley. But as people begin to really experience everything that Allentown has to offer, all the redevelopment, and start to see the effects on the suburbs and the rural areas of our community, I really think that's going to be the first stage into accepting and realizing what urban revitalization can do for them.
And I would also say that, as I said before, we can't separate ourselves by zip code. And in many of our neighborhoods, so there were studies done in Los Angeles around the crack epidemic. And you start looking at the crack epidemic, and you start looking at violence, and then you start looking at the mental health of neighborhoods. And the reality is that through dispossession and social paralysis, we have excluded people into the suburbs, and poverty in the suburbs is on the increase, by the way. So Dr. King said we are all interchanged, and we are all inextricably interchanged through a web of mutuality. What affects one affects everybody, right? So I think we have to continue to push the envelope, continue to create a new narrative. We can't be afraid of change. We can't be afraid of being in the room with folk who are different than us. We've got to make sure we all have the same set of facts, right? And that we're traveling in the same direction. If you want a better Lehigh Valley, you can't do it without Allentown. It's not going to happen, right? So So what does that look like? That looks like conversations, it looks like economic development opportunities, it looks like potential the regionalization of schools, and it looks like folk understanding that there is poverty in Parkland, there is poverty in Lower Macungie. You know, not everybody's living in a $400,000 house, you know? And I know families that have moved to those areas because they want a better school district for their children. And so they are willing to live in a shack in a more exclusive community for a better educational opportunity. That's real talk, right? That's real talk. So it's in their community. So let's not have a myth that poverty doesn't exist in Lower Macungie. I mean, it exists in a different way. Maybe it's not as concentrated, but it's there. It's in Parkland, you know. It's in Salisbury, you know. It's in Tamaqua, it's in Walnutport. Through all the public policy that's happened, we have simply repackaged it, and we have pushed folk further and further and further and further and further out. And I would suggest that there's poverty in pockets of Pennsylvania north of us on 309 that almost rival what's happening in Allentown. So we're interconnected, and that conversation between us needs to happen.
The urban core is critical to a region, whether it's Allentown, Bethlehem, Easton, or any other urban core. And the gentleman that asked the question spoke about Detroit, and you know, we have certainly seen that as Detroit has gone down. The inner ring suburbs have also gone down. You have that ripple effect. As that urban core deteriorates, poverty and the like move out into that inner ring, and then you see that deteriorate, and ultimately an entire region will fail if you don't invest in that urban core. So the revitalization of an urban core is a critical element for the success of a given region.
Yeah, and I would say that I'm looking at Northampton County. There are pockets of Forks Township that have started to become particularly problematic for us, and so it is, you know, it is not just an urban core issue. You know, we need to all own the one Lehigh Valley. It's the mantra almost that we need to all own the issues that are, regardless of the location, whether it's Center City, Allentown, or it's Forks Township, or it's the borough center. They are all our issues, and you know, the issues that are faced by the parents of the children in Allentown are faced by the parents of the children in Pinardville and other school districts. It's not simply the problem of the urban core. So we need to own it. We need to, you know, I need to make sure that when I talk to my kids at night that it's not a scary place to be in Bethlehem on the south side at 9 o'clock at night when we're coming out of a restaurant. It is something that you have to live and breathe, and we all have to own.
I think it's all been said very well. I would just say that the region can be only as strong as its weakest link. And we saw a little bit of this occur in our community with the advent of the neighborhood improvement zone, which really is a urban revitalization piece of economic incentive. It really is. When people talk about, oh, well, companies are just moving from the suburban rim to the downtown, I say, so what? That's a good thing. And if government money helps to incent that, it's good for the entire region, because believe me, the history of economic development across the United States is development will follow infrastructure and public sector investment. The 1950s program of the Highway Act, the Federal Highway Act, drove development to the suburbs. So it was government investment that followed, that economic development followed out. So incentive investment if it drives it back in, that's good. It's good for the region. The region will always be judged by the success or the appearance of its largest city and its urban cores. So you have to have strong urban cores, even to develop industrial parks in outer rim suburbs to attract corporate offices, to attract manufacturers. They're gonna look at your urban core. And one thing I think when we talk about the gentleman who talked about Detroit, which is a very insightful observation and comments, is that what I've seen happen since the NIS has taken hold is less of this negativity that existed at its outset around corporate welfare. Why are we doing this? Who cares about the city? I think people need to see that, wow, this really mattered. This made it better. And yeah, it made it better with money, and yeah, it made it better with government incentive. I would argue that most development had some level of government incentive around it somewhere in its history.
Us. Right here? Okay, let me get the,
Hi, I live in Allentown, and I go to the NIS meetings, and I also spoke to Senator Brown, and I spoke to a lot of people that's involved in this, and I come to meetings like this to hear what you all have to say. I'm kind of frustrated because we have been talking and talking about what's going on and what we see, but there's not been action put on paper to say what we're going to do to solve some of these problems. I think it's great what's happening in Allentown. I think it's fantastic that you're coming in and stuff. I don't think we should drag it to the table. I think we should have already had a plan of what we want them to contribute to, of what our needs for the community is, because we have been living there for years. They're just visitors right now. So we know what is needed in Allentown in order to improve it. So we should hand them a priority list of what we have, of what's needed in Allentown, and say, can you help us to move us forward in this transaction? I would have loved to hear things like the school district, the children, a pipeline from the school to jobs. I've heard Cunningham spoke about, and I really respect him a lot, about skills and jobs and infrastructure and stuff, and I agree with him. But where is the list of what the jobs are out there, what skills are needed, where do we go for training? Where is that list for us to know what the training is so we can tell our youth what's out there so they can start training for what jobs are there and get those jobs? We keep on saying there's over 9,000 jobs in Allentown, but we're not telling them what the jobs, what the skills, and where to go for training. So I want to see action. We have talked about the bad school, we have talked about Allentown, we have talked about Bethlehem, we have talked about how to work together and stuff like that. Let's put stuff on paper, write down what the next step is, and let's start working towards that. I don't see that at all. That's going on and stuff.
Can we get feedback from the group on that? Anyone?
I appreciate you coming to these meetings. Honestly, I appreciate everything you say, and there are a number of programs right now, and I agree, we need to get them on paper. We need to sit down and establish what we can do to assist the community, to assist our children, and to make sure that jobs are available, and there are a number of individuals throughout Allentown right now who are in the job recruiting stage. And I know it's still in its infant stages. Most communities never see the...
I need to say one thing that's
Sure.
very vital. That's very important. I'm sorry, but I need to say it. The people that's at the table is not the citizen that knows what's going on. It's handpicked people that is higher level. We need to have half the citizen and half the other people. Okay? You cannot change when you just have the people that's up there and the people that's below that's not at the table. Because what happened is that, and it's not because they want to do it, because that's at the state level. It's because they think they're helping us. They may say, we need this big building over there that has this stuff here, and all of a sudden, they put me in it, and then there's no food, there's no shelter, there's nothing there. But they didn't think about that because I wasn't at the table. So I'm not blaming you, I'm just saying you have to have both of us at the table. And then also those meetings you're mentioning, they're great meetings, but they're handpicked people, citizens at the table. We need people that are complaining, whatever, at the table and work together. And we need, the major thing I want to say, that's why I took the mic back, is that we need a facilitator, outside facilitator, that everyone respect to be the facilitator of that meeting. Because otherwise we're going in a vicious circle. And what happens is that the people that's above already have a plan of what to do. So they drive the conversation towards that plan. So that's why we need an outside facilitator to facilitate the meeting so that we get what everyone is thinking, not just few. So, I'm just saying, I'm military, and that's how we do things. We don't have time for all the other crap.
What's the great way to engage the people so their voice is heard? And make sure there's action that can be taken. Other than put her in charge.
No, absolutely, absolutely. I'm gonna pass the mic around. because I'm not going to rescue anybody up here. I'm interested to hear her responses. We know that in some other communities, they have done CBAs, Community Benefits Agreement. And for some reason, Allentown, for a variety of reasons, has chosen not to do a Community Benefits Agreement, where the community has been named to be specifically involved in the naming of the reconstruction of the property, so that those folks that live there, right, the sparrow rule, that nothing happens in that community that inadvertently impacts anybody else, any business, any person, any family, any child. So that hasn't been done in Allentown. I'd just be interested to see folk on the panel what their thoughts about CBA or this. I think that's kind of what you're talking about, right? A little bit.
No, I'm talking about the advisor, the
facilitator
that is there to make sure everyone's voice is heard.
Mm-hmm.
Because right now, I mean, they're handpicked people. It should be where people can join if they want to, and it should be transparent.
Ma'am, all I can honestly say is I respect everything you're saying right now, and I personally have never picked the people who sit on these panels.
I know it's not.
But I can say that there are a number of individuals within the development, private development, within the government sector, within the Allentown School District, community activists who are sitting down. Maybe they do not meet the criteria that you're talking about right now, but I can say that we are moving toward a panel very similar to what other cities have already structured. And honestly, I can't speak on behalf of these communities themselves because I'm not sure which stage they're at. But I can say that from a private development standpoint, being the waterfront, city center, whatever development is out there right now, that we are working to make sure that we incorporate not only the students, but the citizens as much as we possibly can. Right now, that honestly, I'm sorry, it's the best answer I can give you, and I'd be happy to sit down with you at any point and discuss further. In fact, I'll give you my contact information at the end of this meeting. But right now, that's really the best answer I can give.
I want to hear from Fred to see if there's
By the way.
I want to hear from Fred to see if there's an area where what she's talking about has worked and how it worked.
I would say that we live in a democratic society, and there's opportunity for citizens or residents to participate in that process at any number of levels. Certainly, you elect the representatives who represent you at the federal, state, and local level. There are any number of local entities, local commissions, boards, etc., that are comprised of volunteers in most instances from the community who come forward and who indicate they want to serve on a planning commission or on an advisory board of whatever. And then going yet another step, there are, under different state statutes, requirements for public hearings to be held where public input is solicited, whether it be on a community development plan, whether it be on a comprehensive plan, on a zoning ordinance, on any number of issues like that. You have a public forum that provides an opportunity for public input to be factored into whatever that document is, whatever that plan is going to be. If we're talking about planning-related issues, that input is an important element in the development of that plan that will ultimately guide the community in terms of decisions that take place.
There's nothing we do in Bethlehem that doesn't have tremendous opportunity for public input, whether it's 2 council meetings a month, whether it's a redevelopment authority meeting, 2 CRIZ authority meetings that are scheduled on a monthly basis, planning, zoning, historic conservation district, historic architectural review board. The list goes on and on and on as to what you can get involved in. We have committee meetings, and there's a number of opportunities on whether it's an initiative, a project. I get a little defensive sometimes because I think people think there isn't that opportunity to have your voice heard, and what sometimes happens is that you come out and you speak and you invest time and energy, and it doesn't end up the way that you want it to end up in the end anyway. But that doesn't mean you haven't had the opportunity to have your voice heard, and that doesn't mean you shouldn't come back out again. That doesn't mean there isn't another issue in which your voice is also tremendously important, and that means separate and distinct from any kind of school district or county opportunity that you have in the city of Bethlehem, or the 2 election days that you can vote on every year. And so I do think that there is a lot of opportunity for folks, specifically in Bethlehem, to speak about whatever the issue is. We partner with all of our organizations within Community Action, Community Lehigh Valley, Community Action Development Corporation of Bethlehem. We have public input on all this. We want your input on our wayfinding sign program. I mean, there isn't much that we do without an opportunity for you to speak.
Just make quick, I want to take one more question, but go ahead, Don.
Well, just real quick in regard to Allentown, and I'm not on the ground like Zach is in the committee meetings, and Paulette knows I love her. We've been working on projects together for a long time. But I think, in general, Allentown is really working hard to try to do a good job. I see Don Bernhardt in the back, who used to be an economic development director in Allentown. He was hired by a couple of the corporations specifically to engage the neighborhoods and the community groups in the development process. Alan Jennings is here. I know that CAC in Allentown has been very engaged in that. I mean, I'm sure there's always more that can be done, but my perspective from what I hear, the attitudes of the companies, the developers, the mayor, the others, is that they've got a nice focus on wanting to engage. They realize that it can't just be about building buildings, that it's building quality of place, and that they need to be engaged.
We have time for one more question? Gotta be a quick question, though.
This has to do with, you say that for the educational system to improve in Allentown, you have to get the community involved. When in the city of Allentown, I believe it's probably the Latino student population is probably more than 50% of the whole school. When they have parent-teacher nights at the schools, almost no Latino parents show up. It seems to be sort of well known that the Latino population in Allentown, a lot of the parents don't seem to have a very strong interest in the educational system. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but that seems to be somewhat of an issue. So how do you engage the Latino community in the educational system?
I think the conversation started. Huh? We got a couple minutes.
He said 5, she said 3 minutes.
3 minutes. Here we go.
So 1 minute. I'm not back to 1 minute. Okay. So I mean, and even part of how that question is framed is problematic to me. When a child cannot learn, I don't blame the child. When parents don't show up for parent-teacher meetings, I say, what, as an educator, am I willing to do to think differently about engaging all of my parents? So there are some very good educators in the Allentown School District. Very good. Very good administrators in the Allentown School District. But, if it doesn't work, maybe we need to try something different. But let's not demonize and say, our parents and families don't care about education. Because they didn't come to your party doesn't mean they don't like you. Maybe our parents, I'm not directing this at you, it's a thinking that we have to begin to unravel. The thinking that begins to demystify certain groups of people about not caring because they don't show up. And I parent 4 children, 2 of them graduated from William Allen. All right? And the reality is that many times when I have showed up, my wife and I, David was my name, right? That it was a non-hospitable environment, right? So part of it is what can our schools do to really operate around a different pedagogy, a different engagement? If we're doing and retooling our students the same way we were 20 years ago, it's not going to work. And I would suggest that part of the issue, though not all of it, is the curriculum that our teachers experience when they're going through and completing their bachelor's in education and get certification. Because many of our teachers don't understand the dynamics of the families that they're working with. It's one thing to teach math. It's another thing to teach a child how to learn math. So I put that back on. So some of that, I've heard, well, we have meetings and they don't show up. But you have meetings at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I mean, there are folk that work. I mean, so sometimes if we're going to be in community, it means we have to learn how to be agile and flexible. So I appreciate the question. I'm done.
Okay. That was a good minute and a half.
Well, I think our panel deserves a big round of applause for their time. So thank you all very, very much.
thank you very much to the panel. I have a couple of announcements to make before we break for lunch. And one is, if you are a planner and you want continuing education credits, you need to make sure you sign up at the tables coming in and fill out a survey. Secondly, we had distributed, and Julie has more, these, what are your preferences for the table talks? We're trying to determine if there's enough interest in all of the table talks to actually hold them. So if you haven't filled out one of these, get one from Julie, and that will help us a lot to determine. And with that, you can go to lunch, and we'll...
What time's the next presentation?
The next presentation is Tom Daniels, the professor of city and regional planning at 12:15.
Well,
Is now.
Hey, thank you. Good job. Yeah. That was a hard one to